Hello and welcome to Radiance Revealed, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Haley. I'm a board-certified dermatologist, fitness enthusiast, nutrition expert, and global explorer that over the years has uncovered that your skin is a true representation of your internal health. Each week, we will chat with leading health, wellness, and even spiritual experts who will reveal secrets to true health and vitality. My goal is to help you change small habits to give you the power to create a more balanced, aligned, and elevated version of yourself. Now let's dive in. So thank you for coming on the show, Katie. Dr. Varman is another board-certified dermatologist, and we are so connected in the way that we look at the sun. And as we get started here, I think that as dermatologists, we can become a little bit dogmatic in telling our patients to avoid the sun because we see such a tremendous impact over a lifespan on how the sun affects the skin, especially when somebody takes off their shirt and you can see the areas that have been chronically exposed to the sun versus not exposed to the sun. But where you and I are aligned is that we really understand that the sun is a vital force. It's a vital energy force. It has properties that maybe we haven't even really conceived at this point that we know are essential for giving us our vitality. So as we dive in, I just want you to explain how you see the sun and how you approach caring for the patient as a whole in your integrative dermatology practice.
Perfect. Yes. And thank you so much for inviting me this afternoon. And really just for opening up this discussion, because like you said, it is, it's kind of taboo as dermatologists to be talking about the benefits of sunlight exposure, because it's true that we absolutely see all the damage that can be caused by overexposure to the sun. But I think what's important to also talk about, what we'll cover today, are all of the benefits that we actually get from sunlight exposure as well. And so it's all about balance, right? It's all about our jobs as dermatologists are teaching people how to create balance in their life and not becoming so focused on the skin cancers and the sun damage that we don't recognize that some sun exposure is beneficial for, a human as a whole person.
Definitely. So what do you think, like, as far as the sun exposure that we get? I mean, for me, I feel that in the morning, it's so important to get out in the sun because it almost like turns on our circadian clock to put us in the daylight enzymatic processes that our skin is in and our body is in and all of our organs. And we need that light in our eyes in the morning. What other benefits do you personally see or know or intuitively know? Because we can't talk about like our intuition, even though it may not be science backed, it is experience backed because we have this long time and we see patterns and we recognize patterns for a living.
Well, and intuition is what kind of led me into this space, because I've always loved being out in the sunshine. And I did my senior talk on photoimmunology, which is the study of how sunlight interacts with the immune system. And so intuition brought me there, but there's actually a huge wealth of information out there that supports all of the things that we're going to talk about. So, intuition kind of opened the doors for me, but then, there is so much information. And what we learn in school is the tiniest sliver of all of the information that you can find out there in the literature. And so I kind of took the deep dive, starting with photoimmunology, and then it just went from there. And like you said, setting the circadian rhythm it's just one thing that sunlight does, but it's a huge piece, right? Because what we know about circadian rhythm is that it dictates, all of our genes, right? The clock genes are inherent to all of our cells, and we are in rhythm. If you get sunlight in the morning, your body tolerates it much better than if you get sunlight in the evening, right? And the same is for our metabolism. So your insulin, is in production and sensitivity is highly dependent on circadian rhythm as well. And so getting out in the morning, getting the light in your eyes, so your body's like, okay, it's morning time. I know what's going on. And then in the evening, right, the opposite being equally true, right? We're all on our devices. We're getting all this blue light in the nighttime. You don't get your melatonin, so you're not sleeping well. Your body's just all out of whack. And so we kind of intuitively know that, and yet the science is all there too. And so circadian rhythm is just one really important piece that the sunlight provides for us.
And what are some of the others?
Yeah, yeah. So my favorite thing, of course, because I am really interested in autoimmune and inflammatory skin conditions, things like eczema and psoriasis and hives and vitiligo, um, is the effect on inflammatory and autoimmune conditions. And so we know that sunlight is, I would say, immune calming. So immunosuppressive when you're looking at the level of the skin in some manners, but as a whole person, it calms down the immune system and it makes us more tolerant of our own bodies and of the world. And we can kind of dig deeper into that. But I also wanted to cover some of the other benefits. And so benefits for autoimmune inflammatory disease, huge benefit when it comes to cardiovascular disease and risk. And Dr. Richard Weller out of the UK has been talking about this for over a decade. He's done TED Talks and everything about the benefit of sunlight exposure and cardiovascular health. And really what's important to comment on too is it's not just the vitamin D, right? Everybody's always like, oh yeah, because of the vitamin D, right? Yeah, you got to get vitamin D, just take a pill and then you don't have the sun damage.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is we have huge studies now, huge studies out of Australia, UK, United States that demonstrate that when we give people vitamin D, it doesn't actually protect them from all the diseases associated with vitamin D deficiency. So it doesn't prevent the increase in all-cause mortality, the cardiovascular disease, the cancers that we see with vitamin D deficiency. And the reason for that is because vitamin D is just one part of what sunlight does for us. And so vitamin D is a marker, right? If you're inadequate in vitamin D, it's probably a marker of inadequate sunlight exposure. And so cardiovascular disease is a whole discussion in itself. And we have very clear, beautiful mechanisms for why that is and how it relaxes the blood vessels. So we have autoimmune inflammatory, we have cardiovascular disease. You talked a little bit about metabolism, right? Circadian rhythm plays a big role in metabolism and insulin sensitivity. Mood, that's a good one for intuition, right? We all know that we inherently feel a little bit better when you go out in the sun, and all those wonderful endorphins that are released and serotonin. And then the last thing I always like to mention, because in the integrative space, we're obsessed with the microbiome, right? Like, I think all of us have kind of fallen in love with the whole concept of it, but it changes the microbiome of your skin in a beneficial way. So ultraviolet light specifically increases beneficial types of staph bacteria, decreases the dangerous or more toxic, kind of obnoxious types of staph. And then it actually has a benefit on the microbiome in the gut, which is pretty neat because you think of it just affecting your skin, but it's actually improving the diversity of the gut microbiome that's in a vitamin D independent manner too. So it just it touches on everything. Like you said, it's the life force, right? There's not probably one piece of our physiology that isn't impacted by sunlight exposure.
Right. There's probably so much more, but I think you really concisely touched on some key important parts of why we know that sunlight is important and that vitamin D is a marker of sunlight. But also, as we get older, isn't it true that we don't convert our UVB into vitamin D as effectively from the sun either?
Right.
So how do we walk the line between, and this might allow us to pivot into an inside out approach, right? How do we walk the line between getting enough sunlight so we have all of those benefits, but not too much so that we tip the scales and now we're getting tons of skin cancers and
Right.
other issues, like even inflaming our psoriasis with sunburn, right? So where do we navigate this territory? Like, what's your expertise on that?
Yeah. And that's what that's what I think as dermatologists, our jobs should be, is to help people navigate exactly that space, because some people are very high risk and should not be getting sun exposure. And maybe for them, vitamin D supplementation is the right way to go, right? And whether that's because you've had a transplant and you're on various immunosuppressive medications, or there's a cancer history that makes you very immunosuppressed, or you're just really, really fair living in a place that your body wasn't genetically designed to live in, something like Arizona, right? And so there are people who are very high risk, and you need to be very careful. But then you have the complete opposite end of the spectrum, people with very dark skin that need a lot more sunlight to get vitamin D and the benefit of sunlight. And, there's, when is it? It was published in like 2016. There's this amazing paper that came out of Texas where the author just straight up said, um, you know, sunlight is not a risk factor for melanoma for people with dark skin. So skin of color from like, I think they started type 4 and above, right? And so they just said flat outright, it's just not a concern.
So let me just interrupt. So skin type 4 and above is basically Hispanic and darker, Asian,
Right.
darker skin. Um, but okay, so for example, African American patient or any one person, not necessarily a patient of ours, but a person living in Chicago, high risk for having low vitamin D, having all of the effects of, low sun exposure, but yet also struggles with pigmentation and brown spots on the face that get left after acne or any sort of melasma. This is
Yeah.
where, as dermatologists, we will often recommend focal areas of sun protection.
Yeah, and I think whether it's just high risk because of, overexposure in the past, or if it's things like melasma or just vanity, right? Sun causes breakdown of collagen and it causes sunspots and it causes all these things. And, obviously we want to not have those things. And so the idea being that, you can protect those high risk areas, your face, your chest, your hands, but then still get the sunlight that you need for optimal health and wellness on the rest of your body. And the more surface area that you expose, the less you need, right? And these are not high levels, right? So in order to get adequate sunlight exposure, obviously it's going to depend on your skin type and where you live, but we're talking in the order of 5 to 30 minutes in most places, depending on where you are, what time of the year is. But 5 to 30 minutes midday sun, because that's when you're getting your UVB. We all get way too much UVA in general. UVB is what we're going for here for a lot of the benefits. And that's that midday sun that, the American Academy of Dermatologists will be like, stay out of midday sun. But that's when you're going to get the most bang for your buck as far as getting the benefits of sunlight without all of that UVA, which tends to be a lot more aging. And so the idea is that you really only need that 5 to 30 minutes, even 3 days a week will keep you out of that vitamin D deficiency zone, and get you the vitamin D that you need for most people. There's a really neat calculator that I just wanted to tell you about. It's from the Norwegian Institute for like Air Research or something like this. But Dr. Webb has been publishing for years on how to get adequate vitamin D, depending on where you live and like how long the exposures need to be and this and that. And there's this beautiful calculator where you plug in your latitude, longitudes, exactly where you are, what day it is. You put in, what like surface you're standing on, what you're wearing, how much skin is exposed, and then you say, how long will it take me to get 1,000 IUs today? And you can plug it right in. So you can be really specific. And if you put in, I want 1,000 IUs every day or every other day, it's a really neat tool. So I'll share that because I think it's fun to use.
Yeah, we'll include that in the show notes. That is great because I
Yeah.
feel it's intuitive for me. I mean, in Arizona, I'm Hispanic, so I have like 5 minutes 3 times a week to my torso, and I feel like I'm good and my D levels are 60, 70 all the time. But I kind of have it fine-tuned because I've been here. But I mean, if it's in the middle of the winter in Chicago and you're dark skinned, you're going to need a lot more than that. And, we
Yes.
really want you to get it from your torso. So I
Well,
think,
and just to add real quick, in the wintertime, right, you're not in those areas, you're not getting a ton of
oh,
UVB. But what we do know is that our bodies are smart, right? And so I think the numbers were if you get up to like a 32, which obviously isn't optimal, going into winter, your levels will drop down about 10 points. And so you really are able to maintain, if you get up to 50 and then you drop to 40 over the course of winter, and then you kind of build yourself back up, like beautiful, right? And so the idea is that we can store, the hormones.
yeah, it's stored. It's a fat soluble, so it's stored. And I think what people don't necessarily understand is you don't need to get a tan and you don't need to get burnt in order to create vitamin D. You can create vitamin D from the sun without getting tan or burned, which means you're not necessarily going to have as many brown speckled spots
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah. And you don't want to burn. Burn is what really increases your risk of skin cancer. And that is indication of a level of inflammation that's causing a lot of DNA damage. And so you really specifically don't want to burn. And what we know from all the studies is that getting half the dose that it takes you to burn is getting you all of these benefits that we're talking about. And so there, you don't need to get anywhere near burning to get the benefits, and you specifically should not burn.
You need to get a tan. What do you think about that? Getting the callus and the base tan. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on
Yeah. I mean, there's really no doubt that having a tan does protect you from exposure, but you don't need a tan in order to be getting adequate vitamin D from the sunlight. Some people just period don't tan, right? And so it's not something that need to be forcing on your skin to get a certain color. Some people look out a window and they get a tan. They tan so easily. And so everybody's bodies are different, and you shouldn't judge the right amount of sun based off of the tan that you get.
Exactly. Thank you. So if you are someone who is in the sun or you just want to have that healthy protection from the inside out, what should you look to do in your diet or supplements? Is there anything that you recommend?
Yes, yes, lots of things. And this is that kind of holistic integrative approach to dermatology, which is we want to support all of our innate mechanisms, all of the things, all the tools our body have in place naturally to protect ourselves from sun exposure. And there's a lot of them. And so the idea, sunscreens and things that are blocking have a role, but there's a lot more that we can do. And so I know you've talked about polyphenols before, but there's a couple different levels too, right, that we can protect our skin. So the three main things that happen after the sun gets into your skin, past your clothes or your sunscreen, the three main things that drive skin cancer are the oxidative stress. So all of those reactive oxygen species that just kind of explode out of there, those are the ones that are breaking down your collagen and causing a lot of indirect DNA damage. There's inflammation that happens. That's what causes that sunburn that you get. And so when you're looking at SPF, the only thing they're measuring with sunscreen is the inflammation, is that one piece, is the redness. But inflammation plays an important role because your body can't repair its DNA very well when it's inflamed. And then the last part is immunosuppression. And so when you get exposed to the sun, it causes local immunosuppression in the skin, and that enables the growth of tumors, which are otherwise actually pretty easy for our immune systems to identify. So when we're looking at lifestyle benefits, we want to hit all those three things. We want antioxidants, we want anti-inflammatory, and we want things that support the immune system. And we have tools for all those things. And so the antioxidants, most people are aware, these beautiful polyphenols, the colorful fruits, vegetables, spices, herbs. They're even in nuts and coffees and teas, right? Polyphenols, healthy whole foods do a really great job. Carotenoids, so that's your lutein, astaxanthin, beta carotenes, those reds, oranges, and yellows. They're have an entirely different mechanism than those antioxidants, but they're equally important. They're actually depositing themselves in your skin and blocking light. And so when you're talking about these gentlemen up in Chicago who aren't getting any sun but getting freckles all over their face, what we fail to talk about a lot is visible light, right? Right now, the screen's blaring on our face. We're getting a ton of blue light, and blue light is a huge driver for hyperpigmentation, and we are not protected by most sunscreens. You have to have the iron oxide in the sunscreen, and most men are not wearing sunscreen with iron oxides because they don't like it's not a foundation for them. But carotenoids, lutein specifically, it absorbs blue light. So wonderful. Perfect, right? It's actually blocking it.
That's the active in what foods?
So the colors, like we were talking about, orange, red, yellow, everyone thinks of
Like
carrots
carrots,
and
tomatoes, red
tomatoes.
cabbage,
Yep.
purple
All,
cauliflower,
all the beautiful colors. Yep. And then the astaxanthin actually comes more from like fish,
salmon.
yeah, in this
Yeah, this
kind.
is one of my favorites. Okay.
Yes,
So
yes.
about the food versus supplements, do you have any
Hmm.
partition?
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't mention with the food, the omega is the other part that is really, really important too. We have tons of studies demonstrating the omegas and the benefit on for sun protection as well, like huge. So omega 3s specifically. So for me, for people who are low risk, I think diet is probably the best way to go because you should be eating like that anyways. Whole foods rich in all of these things. But for people who need a little extra support or athletes who are outside in the sun or for higher risk people, I do supplement. We're actually developing our own supplement right now, also based off of all my research. It's being manufactured, and I'm really excited about it because I think they're just so powerful for people. And I think they're highly underutilized because you ask your dermatologist and they're just like, sunscreen. That's always the answer. Stay out of the sun and get sunscreen. But so from a supplement perspective, the backbones are really the polypodium leukotomos, which I know you've talked about before on other episodes, so I won't belabor. The niacinamide is really important. Niacinamide is really, really important because as I was talking about before, there's different places where you can target the damaging effects of sunlight. And what niacinamide does is it prevents the energy crisis that occurs in your cell after sunlight exposure that prevents DNA repair. So what happens when you're in the sun is your mitochondria kind of go into shock, and they're not producing energy as well. And then without that energy, you can't repair your DNA and you get damaged. Niacinamide or B3, right, it's a critical part for the mitochondria cofactor, and it prevents that crisis from occurring. And so you don't get as much DNA damage and you don't get the immunosuppression following sunlight. So the backbone of supplements that you'll see out there are niacinamide, polypodium. That's like very traditional. It's been out forever. Awesome. It works really well. But then if you add an adequate amount of the carotenoids, which individually can get you SPFs up towards like the 5 range, plus all the visible light support, you can add carotenoids in there. Very, very effective. And then there's additional antioxidants. I know I've heard you talk about green tea and pine bark extract, and I know I love them too. And there's a lot of things like the proanthocyanidins, which are in like great seed extracts. And so those are the kind of things that I'm including in my product because they're all very specifically photoprotective, right? There's lots of other things that are great for your skin, tons of things, right? Like all the micronutrients and, probiotic and all these things that are great for your skin. But there's ones that are very highly specifically photoprotective. And we have tons of studies that show that they increase how much sunlight it takes to burn your skin. So I love supplements and I love supplementing. I don't think everybody needs to, but it can be a really nice tool.
Yeah. Wow. You covered that so well. I don't think people really understand how great an SPF of 5 actually is when you're doing it in
Uh-huh.
because we're always saying SPF 30, SPF 50. So can you just explain what SPF actually means?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
Stuff that I know.
important. It's important because it's just one measure of sun protection. When you really want to look at sun protection, you want to look at the things I was talking about before, like how much inflammation is it causing? How much DNA damage are you getting from sunlight? How much immunosuppression in the skin are you getting? And then there's, the inflammation, which is just that redness factor. And when you're picking up a sunscreen, the SPF is just a measure of how much it protects from redness, meaning inflammation, which is still a pretty good indication of how much it's blocking. But it doesn't tell you about those other factors. And so we know that when we add things like polypodium leukotomos or DNA repair enzymes into a sunscreen, you get maybe a little bit added benefit of SPF, but you're getting way more benefit when it comes to protecting your DNA that's going on underneath. There's really nice studies with sunscreens of polypodium leukotomos and with the DNA repair enzymes that show superior protection for your DNA than sunscreen alone.
So with like so basically when we're measuring SPF, it's based off of UVB rays, the burning rays in the
Right.
in the spectrum of light that's coming to us, which is a much greater spectrum than just UVB, but the burning is what's measured. So if it takes you 20 minutes to burn naturally, then an SPF of 5 will take 5 times longer before you burn, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah. I launched off on a tangent. Sorry. Yes, UVB is what you're measuring, right? And that's why now they say everything is broad spectrum now, really, where it covers that UVA as well. But they still aren't great at long range UVA. So the UVA that's like kind of way out there, we still don't have great protection from that. And then it's really damaging. And more importantly, it's highly immunosuppressive. So those long wave UVAs out there that we're kind of getting a little bit of coverage of, they are highly immunosuppressive, especially for men. Men are immunosuppressed like 3 times, higher rates than women with this UVA. And so you're getting damage and suppression and these things that you're not recognizing with SPF alone, with sunscreen alone, because you're like, I'm not burning, I'm good. But you're getting a lot of damage and things that are going on that you're not recognizing, which is why the holistic approach says, hey, you got to protect yourself. You got to eat right. You got to get your omega-3s, right? You got to, exclude all your inflammatory oils, and really allow your skin to do its job.
It's interesting that you point that out with the UVA because I've lived a lot of places. I've lived Hawaii, I've lived the East Coast, and I've lived in the Rocky Mountains at elevation.
Mm-hmm.
And I see very different effects of the environment on the skin. I feel like in Hawaii or California, I was living in coastal Southern California, the sun tends to cause like a lot of brown discoloration and dyspigmentation of the skin. Whereas at elevation, and I'm wondering if this has to do more with the deep collagen destruction um, from those more deeply penetrating rays, that I see more of the coarse wrinkles, like the hatch mark wrinkles.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
throwing out theories.
Yeah. I can't say that I've practiced in places that are that variable to notice that. But the other thing that I think plays a factor into that is, when you're exposed at these really high elevations, you burn like very quickly, like really quick. And so I think people are also, you're probably getting a lot more UVA than you're realizing in some places because you're not burning. Do you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah,
so it's kind of
you're not
sneaky.
getting the warning. So
Not
you're,
getting that warning signal. That's like why people in tanning beds that are UVA tanning beds are destroying their skin because there is no warning signal with that, nature gave us UVB and you're like, oh God, I'm getting pink. I got to get out. And in a tanning bed, it's just like all UVA all day and you just destroy the collagen, deeply. So, but that's a really, really interesting observation.
yeah, I find it's really interesting. So, I mean, as far as recommendations, and I want to jump into topical sunscreens and what people should look for, but the general recommendations that I give locally, and I know it's hard to give general recommendations because everyone is so different, is I have people really be very careful about what we call the high real estate areas or the areas that are exposed every single day to the sun, like your face, your neck, your chest, and the back of your hands that really show aging when you're 40, 50, 60, and beyond. And then expose the torso for the formula that we'll share in the show notes that Dr. Varman is going to share with us, and expose the torso to get the benefits of sun without getting the chronic ongoing wear and tear, basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
How does that sit with you?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly what I recommend too, right? Protecting the high risk areas, or the areas you don't want the spots, and then exposing the other areas. And we have a lot of tools topically to protect those areas, that extend far and beyond just the sunscreens. But what sunscreen you choose does make a big difference. And I'm a big supporter of mineral based sunscreens, because of the FDA studies in 2019, 2020 that demonstrated that we are absorbing the chemical blockers very avidly, like very, very, very avidly into our bloodstream. And doesn't sit well with me, even though we have no evidence of harm. We have no evidence of safety either. And so for me, I recommend mineral blockers. And like we were talking about before, using the ones with iron oxide in it, and it'll be listed as an inactive ingredient, like the very, very, very last one. So you have to look for these things. But the active ingredient will say zinc or zinc titanium. And then the very last thing on the inactive will say iron oxide. And that's what's going to protect you from the visible light and that kind of hyperpigmentation that nobody loves so much. So the sunscreen selection is important. And of course, reapplying and all the things dermatologists beat into you every time you see them about sunscreen. But then there's other topicals that really fall along the same kind of lines, like we were talking about for systemic oral things. So topical antioxidants do work. We have studies in humans demonstrating that if you use them before UV exposure, they protect from DNA damage, discoloration. And then we have animal models for all these things that show that when you place them topically, that they prevent skin cancer after repeated exposure to the animals, or they reduce the amount of skin cancer that they get. So usually I'm recommending in the morning, like a nice, like a antioxidant, like a CE ferulic or Floritin. You do have to be careful with the antioxidants because some of them, if they're not made well, aren't really doing anything. But that can be an important player. Then your sunscreen, of course, especially for me. I always wear sunscreen to work because I'm in a screen all day. And then when I'm at home, it's like kind of hit or miss. But if I'm in front of a screen all day with all this artificial light, I'm always having my sunscreen on. And then in the evening, the things that we know are beneficial. So niacinamide topically works the same way as it does systemically. So topical niacinamide prevents that energy crisis from occurring and prevents immunosuppression in the skin, even topically. Plenty of research demonstrating that in animals and in humans. DNA repair enzymes are something that was kind of new to me a couple of years ago. They work, like they really work. And there's great evidence for them. And I have no idea why they haven't infiltrated the dermatology world as much as I would have expected them to. But I like recommending them. They're very, they're pricey, but all of the science demonstrates great efficacy for them, and they can be inside your sunscreen or they can be applied, independently. So,
Yeah, I just returned from the Science of Skincare Summit, and I have to say the DNA repair enzymes were the thing that impressed me the most because all the other things we've been recommending for years and years. So, like, how do these work and who should use them? Should someone in their 20s use them, or it's more of a repair in your 40s? And like, what brands have them that you can recommend for people?
yeah. I don't think there's an age that's too young. A lot of the peptides are geared more towards like regenerating, but DNA repair enzymes are trying to protect the damage from occurring in the first place. And so there's no age that would be too young to use them. And it's really beautiful, neat science, right? These are DNA. So we all have DNA repair enzymes, like everybody does. We have to repair our DNA all the time. But our mechanism for repairing it in humans is actually kind of sluggish and slow. And it takes a couple steps. But the plant and bacterial world has a mechanism that's much faster and much more effective. And some brilliant scientists figured out how to get them to penetrate the skin and do the job on human cells. And so you can put these things directly on your skin, and then they help repair DNA damage after sun exposure specifically. It's really very neat.
Okay, so in the morning, would you apply them in the morning before your vitamin C?
So some of them there's three main types of enzymes, and one of them is actually activated by sun exposure. And so it is a little bit better to use it in the morning, but they're still effective even if you use them at night. And so the regimen that I kind of get into, just because it's hard to just keep piling things on, you start wondering about interactions, but I'll usually do the things that we know you have to have before sun. And that is the serums, the antioxidant serums have to be before sun exposure. If you apply them after, they might help, they might kind of replenish, but they're not preventing anything afterwards. So those ones have to go before. DNA repair enzymes, probably a little bit better before. But usually my when we're talking specifically for sun protection, would be the antioxidants, sunscreen, and then in the evening, the niacinamide, and then the DNA repair. having your retin-A's and all of those are kind of like standard of care in dermatology. But sometimes I even have people do pulses with that as well. So taking time off in the summer because they do increase your sensitivity to sunlight, and not just like, oh, it burned easier. It's like actually increasing your sensitivity. And so sometimes I'll have people in high risk areas that get a ton of sun, take a break in the summer, and then we hit the tretinoin and the AHAs, harder in the winter. So sometimes it's, that's the art, right? You're kind of tailoring your recommendations to the person that's sitting in front of you.
Exactly. I love that so much. So we've discussed why some sun is necessary, how to protect the important areas of the body that's going to show your age in 50 years. And most importantly to me, the thing that I get excited about the most is why your diet really matters and how to supplement it with, polypodium, niacinamide, fish oil, green tea, pine bark, all the things you touched on, and then skincare with your vitamin C, E, ferulic in the morning after cleansing, before sunscreen, and then at night using some of those DNA repair enzymes, plus or minus a retinol, and your niacinamide to help with the inflammation and resolve some of that immunosuppression that happened during the day. Did I get that right?
Yeah, perfect. I know, and I just realized, I was like, we never even circled back to talking about autoimmune and inflammatory stuff. We're going to have to talk more like eczema and all of these. I love talking about sunlight and kids and preventing the atopic march and all of that. So we might have to talk some more.
Yeah, we definitely do. I'm so grateful to know you, and I really appreciate this conversation. And you explain things so concisely and so effectively that I hope we've given people tools to improve their skin, improve their vibrancy, and improve their health. Not be afraid,
Yes, it's all about balance, just like everything else in our life. And so I'm excited that, dermatologists are starting to turn around a little bit more to that holistic approach.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
If you're enjoying the Radiance Revealed podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, please give us a review, as that helps others to find this podcast. And if you want to connect with me, please visit my website, drjenhaley.com, or you can find me on Instagram at drjenhaley.
Hello, everyone. Just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility made for statements made by guests. Neither this podcast nor any of the information contained within it are a substitute for care by a qualified medical professional. This podcast is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or professional advice or services. If you are looking for help in your journey, please seek out a qualified medical practitioner.